IB Nation, Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Thursday, September 11th, and before we start today's show, I feel like the memory of today has been a little bit overshadowed by some of the other evils that have been happening in our world the last few days. But I always try to remember to start today off with just a reminder of people of kind of what this day represents, what this day means, especially for people of an older generation like myself who were a little bit more grown for that period of time. And it's remembering what we went through as a country. But I also think about what we were like the day after 9/11, when we were as unified as we were. And there was a feeling of we were all one nation. We all of different races and different stripes and different political views, but we were one nation, and how I pray that we could somehow get back to that after everything that we've been going through. And that's just, this day reminds me even more so of that, Trevor. And I just like to start the show off with that. And yeah, when I was with Angela at the hospital at St. Joseph Memorial Hospital, or St. Joseph Hospital, there's a beam from the towers there and a memorial for 9/11. And it's just scrolling the names of the people that were lost that day. And you just remind what that meant, and just all the things that have happened since then. So I just want to remember that day, and remember the men and women who sacrificed that day, the firefighters who ran towards danger while everybody else was running away. They ran too. The police officers that saw it and ran to it, they have a level of courage that someone like me will never understand, and it is greatly appreciated, and we will never forget their sacrifice. And all of the other citizens who just were going to work that day and lost their lives simply because they were Americans and didn't believe in something that somebody else believed in. And then you see how that's now so much more prominent in our country, which is sad. And Trevor, something you and I were talking about before we got this show started. So one thing that I do want us to do is say, let's rally around the one thing that we do have in common, and that is Notre Dame football. And so I want to remind us all of that somber moment, and continue to pray for those families, and just pray for our country, and just that it needs healing and needs revival in a lot of ways. But one thing we are going to get to do this weekend, Trevor, is because of the freedoms of those who fight for us, we can talk a little football and we can watch a little football this weekend. And so we're going to continue to focus on that for the remainder of the show. And it's a big game for Notre Dame this weekend, and it's a big moment for Notre Dame this weekend. And we're going to today talk about the keys to victory for Notre Dame. We got some offensive and defensive ones. A little bit interesting conversation that you and I had today, Trevor, about some of the keys, because it's not, there's some that are like, okay, this is specific to this game, but some are that are like, this is more about the character of the football team more so than a specific football thing. And we'll dive into that. And then we're going to also make our game predictions for the Notre Dame and Texas A&M game. We'll predict our game records. That'll be fun. I always enjoy doing that. And then you and I are going to break down some other games, Trev. We're going to talk Georgia, Tennessee. We're going to talk Clemson, Georgia Tech, and we're going to talk Florida, LSU. And then we'll just kind of quickly work through some other games that he and I are going to have our eyes on. It's not a loaded weekend of college football games outside of Notre Dame and Texas A&M and then Florida or Georgia, Tennessee, but still some very interesting games here in week 3 that we're going to talk about as well. So I'm ready to get rolling, Trevor. How are you today? And I'm ready to get into this, man, because this is we're 2 days out. It's 2 days out. Well, 2 days and 6.5 hours out from this big one happening for Notre Dame this weekend.
It's weird to think that the college football season has been going on for 20 days and Notre Dame has played a game.
I know.
Isn't that weird?
It's the worst.
No, I was sitting here and I was like, it feels like borderline. It almost feels like their season hasn't even kicked off yet. I know it has because we watched the game, but it's just between the bye week and then even their game wasn't on the Saturday with the big slate with Ohio State and Texas and LSU and Clemson. They had to wait the additional day, and then they have a bye week followed up by what seems like another premier week 1 type of matchup. And so I'm excited to dive into it today, man. And we're going to start this off by talking, we always break down keys to victory, but we're going to start with team keys to victory and then get into offense and defense here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. And when you go and you think of this, Brian, there's a lot of implications for this game. There's a lot of things that Notre Dame is going to have to accomplish as a team if they want to walk off the field sometime probably around 10:45 at night on Saturday with a win.
Yeah, Trev, we added this little segment because normally we just do offense and defense, but we added this little segment because I do think there are some things that are bigger than just, okay, execute on third down or, control the line of scrimmage, start fast, all the things we're going to talk about. I think there's a couple other things that permeate really through the entire team that will then lead to whether you will or won't have success in those things. And I think the biggest thing for me is I want to see Notre Dame come out and play with some fire. I want to see them come out with energy and intensity. And that was a big frustration I had is it's lazy to say they played soft or they didn't have that's like a bad take, but they still didn't have the same kind of urgency and intensity and fire and physicality that we're used to seeing from this team, right? So again, we like to go from extremes, right? They're either playing Notre Dame football or they were soft and didn't care, didn't look like they wanted to be out there. They looked like they wanted to be out there. They just didn't look like a team that was necessarily mentally ready for the type of game that was going to be, that didn't quite play with the same kind of force. Because if they were soft or didn't play hard, they would have got beat by way more than 3 by Miami. But I still feel like there's a level of energy and urgency and fire and energy and just flying to the ball or playing with the tempo and playing with the physicality that this team needs to play with. And that's got to be the foundation of everything that we're talking about moving forward, Trevor. If that's not there, this game becomes much harder to win for Notre Dame.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to what is your team identity. And one thing that we got so used to seeing last year with this team is no matter what the situation was in the game and no matter how bleak the outlook was, I think back to, when they weren't playing that well against USC and USC was hanging around, or, first half against Penn State. One of the things was the team came out with fire. They came out with the confidence that they were going to come back and win this football game. I think back to Marcus Freeman's halftime speech against Penn State and the fire that they came out with on the opening possession of the third quarter. And there was just a little lack of that when they played Miami, which was interesting. That was one of the more concerning takeaways that I had from the game. And it's not so much to your point, they weren't soft, but it was just that fire that we're used to seeing from guys like Adon Schuler and guys like Drake Bowen and watching Emil Wagner get fired up after a touchdown and things like that. We didn't see that. And that's something that I hope that they get back to. And now you have all of the ammunition for it. You lose in week 1, you're playing at home at night in your season or in your home opener under the lights against a top 20 team. It's one of those where if you can't get up for this one, what's it going to look like the rest of the season?
Yeah. Part 2, and this kind of ties in with that, Trevor, is I want to see a football team that knows how to handle adversity. And that's twofold. That's coming into the game, which ties into the first point. How do they handle what happened this weekend? It's interesting how 2 people can watch the same press conference and come to completely different points of view.
Yeah.
And I've seen people talk about how the players on Tuesday night, didn't look like they were confident. And then I've seen other people that no, they were matter of fact, they know exactly what's going on and they're going to go out there and handle business. I don't know which one that is. I didn't realize there's this many body language experts in our country. But how they play will ultimately tell the story of where they were and of where they are in their headspace. So how do you handle the adversity of losing the season opener? How do you handle the adversity of not playing well as an individual player? How do you handle, the fact that, hey, you're going to look in the mirror and say, hey, we lost this football game and I'm, I got to own my role in it and then fix it and get better. But then even if you come in with the right mindset and you come out right away and boy, you're coming out, you're ready to roll. And then something happens, something bad happens, a turnover, a blown coverage that leads to a score, a bad play on special teams, something like that happens. How do you handle that? What was so great about last year's team is they could handle those things pretty well. You come out against Louisville, you've just been kind of booed on your home field the week before against Miami of Ohio, and you've got to start fast. That was, obviously a big key in that game. And what do they do on the first interaction of the game? You fumble the opening kickoff. Louisville gets the ball. They go down and score a touchdown. And you're like, well, we're going to find out where this team is. And what do? They go right down the field and score. And then Notre Dame scores, I think, 21 unanswered points. at that point in time, right? Like that's handling adversity. Yeah, they came in fired up, but when things kind of hit the fan during the game, they responded well. And so when I look at this football team, Trev, every team is different. Just because some of the players in this team were part of last year's team doesn't mean this team's going to respond the same way. But how will this team respond to the adversity of the opening game loss, but then also adversity that will inherently come in a game like this? I mean, even games where Notre Dame won convincingly last year, there was some level of early game adversity. An injury, a turnover, a mistake. I mean, the Stanford game, Notre Dame won that game by 6 touchdowns. But early in the game, they were sloppy. They had some missed plays. You had the Bo Collins fumble. You had a blown assignment that let Ashton Daniels go for a long play. There was adversity you had to overcome. They did, and they ended up rolling. So there will be some adversity that also happens during the game, Trevor, and how this team handles that is going to, A, tell us a lot about this football team, but then also, B, it's going to have a big role to play in how, whether or not Notre Dame can come away with a victory at the end of the day.
Oh, absolutely. And we saw individuals be able to handle adversity against Miami, but it was at the individual level. We're talking big picture team goal here to walk away with a win on Saturday night against Texas A&M. We watched CJ bounce back from throwing an interception. And yes, I understand it was a crazy interception. It's bounces off of Jordan Faison, Greathouse tips it in the air, and then the corner kicks it with his heel, and then Ruben Bain picks it up. I understand but it was the wrong read. And he bounces back and leads Notre Dame on consecutive scoring drives. So we saw that individual. We watched Malachi Fields bounce back after taking some time on the sideline after the fumble and have 2 big catches in the game. We watched Eli Raridan continually battle adversity where he drops 2 passes and then rips off a 65-yard reception to put them down inside of the red zone. We watched Boubacar Traore overcome some adversity, which they just weren't generating enough pressure as a unit, and he was able to be the only player who walked away with a sack that night. That has to be team-wide. I could not agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. When I look at this team and I break down what they need to do overall, you and I were talking before, again, about just overall keys. And one of them is you have to win situational football. And I think that conversation has to start around the middle 8. Notre Dame got absolutely dominated in the middle 8 of last game. Miami took over with the ball with a little over 5 minutes left in the second quarter against Notre Dame in the first half. And Notre Dame got the ball back once, and it was when they took a knee at the end of half. 5-minute long, 75-yard scoring drive. Miami opens up the second half with over a 7-minute long, 75-play scoring drive. Notre Dame touched the ball once in the middle 8, and it was to take a knee. You have to find a way to win the middle 8. How do you do that? You have to be more efficient on third down, on offense and on defense. You have to keep drives alive on offense, and you have to find a way to get off the field on defense. Absolutely have to. You have to find a way to win the turnover battle. Like you and I have talked about on the show so many times, Notre Dame last season led the country with 33 takeaways. 32 of them came in wins. Football can be a complicated game at times, Brian. That's sometimes not that complicated.
And sometimes not. That's right.
And sometimes it's as simple as, hey, when Notre Dame wins the turnover battle, that is a huge indicator that they're on their way to win. Situationally, they have to be better.
And you can win games and win the turnover battle or lose the turnover battle when you're playing teams that aren't very good. You're going to struggle to do that when you're playing teams that are good. And that's obviously going to be a big thing. The Texas A&M game last year, Trev, perfect example. Hard-fought game, close game. Notre Dame won by 10, but that was a tie ball game in the fourth quarter. What was a big part of that game? Texas A&M turned the ball over twice. Notre Dame didn't turn the ball over at all. A week later, you lose by 2 points in Northern Illinois. You turn the ball over twice. They turned it over 0 times. I mean, it's not that complicated when you're talking about when you play good teams. The next time that Notre Dame lost a turnover battle after Northern Illinois was against Penn State. And that played a big role in Notre Dame needing some late big plays to kind of, make that game happen. So, and what was it that kind of got them back in the game? It was finally forcing a turnover at the end of the game that allowed them to win that football game. So you are correct. It's not, it's a big part of the game. There's no doubt. And when you talk about that, there's more to this. The situations, Notre Dame's got to win the situations. Trev, you talk about the middle eight, you talk about the turnover battle. I think they lost on third down, both sides of the ball on Sunday night against Miami. It's they were not very good on first down. Miami was very good on first down. There were a lot of those aspects of it that were not there on in the opener against the Hurricanes. One area where Notre Dame did well was, which is partly why the game was maybe a little closer than it could have been with how poorly Notre Dame played, is Notre Dame went 3 of 3 in all touchdowns in the red zone. Miami went 2 of 4 on touchdowns in the red zone, 3 of 4 overall, including settling for a field goal. So you did win the red zone battle in that game, which helped keep that game closer. And you're going to have to do that again against Texas A&M. So I think a lot of those situational football type of scenarios, which I think have a lot to do with preparation and coaching and focus, you lost a lot of those against Miami. And you've got to get that back. And it's not just about getting it back, Trev, but to your point, these are areas where Notre Dame dominated last year. You talked about the turnover battle. Notre Dame was one of the best teams in the country when it came to, winning turnovers. They were plus 18 last year, Trev. Plus 18. That's really impressive. But the other part is they dominated the middle eight last season. Dominated it. And so this is, again, it's not just about the practicality of winning football games. It's also getting back to, can you establish an identity? You say, well, you need to get back to your identity. Well, this isn't last year's team. They're not getting back to their identity. This team still has to establish its identity. And I think all these things that you and I talked about, coming out and playing with a certain level of energy and focus. There can be scenarios, Trev, where you are overhyped up. You've got too much maybe energy going on. You're not focused. You're not disciplined. You make mistakes that you're like, dude, you can't do that, man. Like, you got to be better than that. But it's a discipline within that fire and energy. It's about how do you handle adversity. It's about, can you win the key situations? What does Mark Sherman say? Win the intervals kind of thing. Can you do that and establish that this team is also that way? Because as of right now, they're not. And so I think that's going to be a big key. I don't care if you do it next week against Purdue, to be completely honest with you. I don't care if you do it against Boise and an inferior opponent. I don't care if you do it, to future Stanford. I care that you do it in the big games. And that's why I think this game is so important, because can they establish it against what we have argued in the summer? And it may or may not come true, but what we argued in the summer was their toughest opponent. Can they show that identity? Can they establish that identity in a game like this? Then you're going to say, okay, I feel better about the opener. We can now chalk that up to kind of, hopefully, or maybe chalk that up to opener on the road, bad weather, just a lot of things happened. It just was one of those days. But this team has rebounded and they're going to be fine. I think that's why these things are so important, because it's not only going to help us learn, it's not only going to help them win the football game, but it's going to help us learn a lot about who this football team is.
Oh, I agree completely. Look, man, I think one of the things that makes some teams so impressive, you think of some dynastic programs over the course of, let's just say, the start of the 2000s. What have always been the teams that have been prevalent? Well, there's, Alabama, of course. There's Clemson had their run from really 2013 to 2020. You had, Ohio State has always been in that conversation, talking those upper echelon teams. And every year they have new rosters, new faces, give or take a couple of positions. But their program identity is still the same. Nick Saban at Alabama was always known for having a good defense. You rotated players all the time. Whether, you go from, having D. Milner to fast forward to the end of the tenure when you have Trayvon Diggs and Pat Surtain II. But the thing that remained constant was your program identity. Marcus Freeman's program identity needs to be playing with fire and aggression and winning the middle eight, winning the turnover battle, regardless of who lines up and who's in the two deep. Now, I think that is something that is at stake. I agree with you completely, because if they're not able to do it in the big games, it's not going to matter what you do against inferior level opponents. So I agree with you. I agree with you completely. Couldn't agree more. Well, listen, folks, that is going to do it for part one of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast. But don't go anywhere. We have plenty more to cover. We're diving into keys to victory for the offense and the defense next. But before we get there, make sure you guys hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the CFB Nation channel. Vince and I are going live tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern time to do the 4th installment of the spread option. We're going to be talking about some of the games today, some of the different spreads, locks, and what you guys should stay away from this week. So be sure you're tuned in there and subscribe to the channel. And then, as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.